Hi folks, I'm Matthias. I live here in Berlin. I'm a founding partner and executive coach at the Intention organization where I work with my partner Sarah, who's over in LA, to help our clients, like tech founders, executives, and leadership teams become more effective leaders. Before starting this business a couple of years ago, I had previously worked as an engineer, founded several companies, served as CEO at one of them, and worked as CTO at the company that was founded by my now business partner, Sarah. This is a common issue, I'm told. Did I? Oh, beautiful, thank you. Oh, I'm just going to stand over here. We've also been working on a book to help other founders and executives build effective and particularly humane organizations. The book is meant as a guide through the challenging yet perpetually reoccurring challenges that you have as you scale and grow organizations. It's been 4 years in the making, which is I'm struggling to grasp sometimes, but it's finally coming out next year, and I'm rather excited about it. The book's themes are leadership and management and the struggles therein, which is also what I want to talk about today. Oh, there we go. Many of us haven't started our careers as managers. Instead, we were new managers, myself included. We were pulled, pushed, or shoved into a leadership position, or ended up in one because it was something we were keen to try out, or because we wanted to support the people around us. Or it happened because we were really good at the work we did as individual contributors, and someone else assumed this would make us perfectly suited to manage other people. Many of us were just new managers trying to figure out what to do. When I got pulled into the role of CEO at the company I co-founded, I was suddenly tasked with managing the business and the people in it. But I had no idea what that meant. When I got the title, I was still assembling office furniture, like the IKEA dude here. And it's not like that work was beneath me, right, as a CEO, but it didn't seem like the best use of my time. But I was still left to figure out on my own what it actually meant to be a CEO, to be a manager, to be a leader, which is what most of my clients are struggling with as well. They, just like I did back then, are likely bringing in lots of their own struggles, anxieties, and delusions into the work as manager. What do those look like? Ooh, this is going to be a challenge, this slide. For instance, they might not know where to start or even what to do in their new role as a manager. They might have a tendency to micromanage or to be completely hands-off and leaving their team without direction and support. They might have a hero complex where they're jumping in when work isn't done fast enough or to whatever standards they have that they're not communicating to their team. They might not be delegating. They might be overconfident in their work as a manager based on what they've done previously, maybe as an individual contributor. Or they bring in any kind of other struggles into this new role. At least it's keeping things interesting. Okay. Oh, let's try this one. Okay. This way. Okay. But once we move into management, all these struggles trickle down into our teams. They will annoy and frustrate them, even cause them to leave, and still we might be convinced that it's them, that it's not us. It's yet another delusion that we're trapped in, right? Another struggle and anxiety in ourselves that we avoid looking at. All we do is hurt our team because we're not willing to look at our shadow. Oh, this is better. More often than not, leadership and management, especially when you're new to both, feel like climbing a mountain, where you never quite reach the top. It's a constant upwards movement where something is in your way every single day. And as you climb the mountain along the way, what you run into, what's blocking your path, are all the delusions, the anxieties, and the struggles that you carry as a manager, whether you're new or experienced. There's always more that appears to be blocking your path. Now, a former mentor of mine compared the job of management to a box of chicken shit that's waiting on your desk every single day. It comes in different sizes, varying from day to day, but it's always there. And you have to clean it up. If you don't, there's going to be 2 boxes tomorrow. And for some reason, that metaphor really stuck with me, and it resonates quite well, which I'm sure it does with many of folks here as well. It makes sense instantly. And I say this metaphor in the sweetest way possible. Today, I want to talk about 2 delusions in which I struggled as a new manager. In one, I relied on my team's common sense rather than doing my work as a manager to set them up for success. In the other, I struggled to set expectations with my team on what it means to provide meaningful feedback. What they have in common is that I failed my team, or someone in it. They had in common that the issue was with me, not with them. And on their own, as we go through them, they might seem like very small blockages on the path, maybe even just a pebble on the way, but they've shaped my leadership and management style ever since. So let me start with this story. This happened at a company I co-founded in its very early years. I probably was at that point already carrying the title of a CEO, but was still heavily involved in the engineering work. We were in the middle of handling an extensive outage. Site has been down for several hours, and we were just getting close to recovery. Alongside the founders, all of them engineers, we plunged a new engineer into the stressful and deep end of managing software in a live system. This was their first time managing an incident in code territory that they weren't familiar with. We assumed, that this person would just pick things up and use common sense to do things as we would do them. And when it came to recovering the system after, as we were reaching the point of recovery, we had the new engineer run a query that would update a couple thousand database records to quiet things down after the outage. But instead, he ran a different query, which quickly overloaded the system. We swooped in and quickly got to work recovering the system. And then we asked him to run the same query again, but this time correctly, so not the correct query. Being very nervous, which is very understandable in a situation like this, he ran the faulty query again, which once again overloaded the system. And I, frustrated to no end, threw my keyboard in the air and let it crash on my desk. Thankfully, I wasn't in an office or on video, or I'd have looked like the angry and incapable manager that I was. And the dent in my tabletop haunted me for years, reminding me of what I'd done and how I'd recovered over time. After this incident, I shifted my view on what it means to delegate, what it means to set expectations, and how to help people gain confidence in new work. I shifted my view on what accountability means. Common law would have me either yell at this employee because they didn't do their work right, or simply fire them. Or common law would have me point the finger to an individual disguised under the phrase of human error. Either way, fault is theirs, not mine. When we talk about accountability, we talk about consequences. It's been the common element in every single conversation I have about this topic with clients, other founders, or senior leaders. The lore goes that if someone made a mistake, there have got to be consequences. Of course, they only apply to the person who failed to do the work right. What's often missing is an introspective look at what you or I, as a manager, did or didn't do to bring the failure about. Instead, we expect folks to just get it and do it right the first time. At least I did back then. And if they don't, it's clearly their fault. We say that their common sense should tell them to do things the way we want them to. What I didn't do back then, when we decided to plunge him in, is to take a moment to consider whether this employee had the skills he needed to mitigate this outage. With some level of confidence. We were a young company, we just needed all hands on deck. Realizing that they likely didn't have the confidence and the experience, I could have done any of these things. I could have let them observe only and have everyone in a call or as we were working through this outage, explain to them what we're doing. Afterwards, we could have debriefed and explained more about our thoughts and actions so that they understood how and why we did things the way we did. I could have started training them on a previous occasion, on a previous incident, or simply taking the time when things are actually running well, just not to say between incidents, because that seems wrong, to explain the rough framework that we had in place to handle outages, transferring as much of what I knew as possible. Or, we could, in the company, we could have started building up documentation and knowledge-sharing practices to make spreading knowledge and also de-risking bus factor folks like myself an established practice. I was on call for a product for 24/7 for several years, so I had deep understanding of the entire system, its fault, and its behaviors, which is a risk to the business more than anything. And based on these three realizations, I created a new view on accountability for myself. In this new view, I focus a lot more on what I do as a manager than what I think or hope or expect the other person or people to do. And here's what that looks like as a framework. First, we set expectations. This includes timeframes, the task at hand, who should be consulted, who should they go to for feedback, and what the outcome should be at the end. Setting expectations is about setting boundaries required to ensure that the work is moving closer to success than it is to failure. And a thing to note here is that setting expectations is a conversation. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way approach of, I expect of you, and you do it without questioning it. It's a negotiation of what's reasonable and required to be successful. But second, spend time in coaching, mentoring them. It was a great talk on coaching yesterday. But many managers take step one and then hope for the best, citing fears of micromanagement to rationalize their hands-off approach. But not everyone has the experience or the confidence to get the job done, as we heard in the anecdote earlier. They'll need coaching and mentoring, depending on where they're still lacking skills, experience, or confidence. And that kind of support can come from you or someone else. But as a manager, it's up to you to ensure that they have the support. And third, along the way, provide plenty of feedback. This step aims to prevent great disappointments at the end for both you and the person or people that you're delegating to. It's about checking in regularly, discussing the state of the project, where this person might be stuck, or the people, and providing them with feedback on what's already working and where they should improve or change something. In this view, accountability is not about consequences, but about support to bring about a successful end result for everyone, which is really, I would posit, is what we're all after. Now I need this. For the second leadership delusion I want to talk about today, I want to spend some more time on the feedback part of accountability. It's crucial for feedback to flow openly, not just between two people, but in the entire organization. And yet, getting open and constructive feedback is a challenge everywhere. Back when I worked as a CTO, someone on my team had put together a long proposal that outlined a new release process and branching strategy, which already thinking about it caused me to sweat back then, because according to our decision-making process, the proposal was shared for feedback before it was finalized. The proposal was written by a senior and well-respected engineer with tenure at the company, and within a few days, a lot of thumbs-up emojis had accumulated in the document, signaling approval from a broad group of engineers. But behind closed doors, two other senior engineers with tenure at the company approached me and voiced their concerns about the proposal. They didn't agree with the approach, but hesitated to voice their dissent in public. The engineer who'd written the proposal had only received positive feedback so far, though they also hadn't exactly sought out feedback explicitly. They'd only shared the document in accordance with the process, pushing the ball over to everyone else to spend time, energy, and focus on their proposal, having to think it through from beginning to end. But positive feedback only came in emoji form, and the critical feedback wasn't provided because of a perceived barrier. Even though these were two of my most senior folks in the company, those folks who had a different opinion, they hesitated because they didn't want to be perceived as rocking the boat, as being too negative when others seemed in full support. Meanwhile, a new release process and branching strategy with potentially grave consequences for the team and our ability to ship was sailing through the decision-making process unchallenged. I learned 3 important things from this incident. 1, feedback generally isn't given freely, especially when the scope is broad, like providing feedback on the last 6 to 12 months when it comes to personal feedback, or when the scope is complex, like giving feedback on a branching and release process, whose impact in the long term most people neither have the time nor the energy and maybe not even the experience to think through completely. Second learning is feedback especially doesn't flow well when it's going to be perceived as negative, or when the stakes and the potential for conflict are very high, or when it's moving upwards to the boss. And that means you need to actively remove these barriers to create an open flow of feedback. One common approach to improving feedback is the start, stop, continue approach, which many of you are probably familiar with. You mention at least one thing somebody should start doing, that they should stop doing, and that they should continue doing. Works in retrospectives, works in personal feedback. And it sounds simple enough. But here's the thing. Start, stop, continue requires a well-developed feedback muscle. If the person providing the feedback is already great at it, they won't even need these 3 words to provide feedback. But because the scope with all 3 words is so broad, it's also not helpful that most feedback cycles are painfully long. Would anyone really remember what you or I did 3 or 6 months ago unless they keep a very detailed feedback log? Most of what happened then has already faded from memory. Collecting any kind of feedback this way takes up a lot of energy and time, which also why nobody really enjoys performance review season. One of the greatest hurdles to providing useful feedback is that simply asking for it, or using frameworks like start, stop, continue, require everyone to think. Everyone, that is, except for the person waiting for the feedback. Everyone asked to provide the feedback needs to overcome several barriers. They need to understand the context of an entire document, or a process proposal, or the last 6 to 12 months when it comes to personal feedback. They might need to think about what feedback might actually be helpful for you to improve something, whether that be your professional development, the said process, your code, etc. They might need to tread carefully, not to come across as too negative. They might not want to criticize the boss or another senior in the company. And third, they have tons of other stuff on their mind and on their plates. Spending so much time on feedback is a distraction for most folks. And unfortunately, not everyone has the time to easily overcome these hurdles or the experience. So I started helping my team to come up with feedback that was actually meaningful and helpful. I started by figuring out what particular parts I want feedback on. Again, whether that be a document or personal improvement doesn't matter. Then I created specific questions to surface their thoughts. And so what does that look like in practice? Say I'm doing a 360 for myself, and I want to work on my leadership style. Here are the 3 key questions that I ask my team. First one, what are the top 3 things that I did that hindered the organization? Second one, what do you suggest I do differently if you were in my position? And the third one, how would you describe my leadership style? These questions remove barriers by explicitly asking for situations where I messed up, inviting upwards feedback that would otherwise be perceived as being too negative, or risking whatever bosses do when they get negative feedback. They reduce the scope to specific aspects of my work as a manager. And this is about leadership style. This could be anything, like my communication style or how I delegate. These questions also make it easy for people to just come up with a few words. Again, time and energy, right? And it could still be, it's still very likely that I get something useful even from them, trying to paint me a picture of what my leadership style is in practice. And there's a limit on how many answers I'm looking for to make it all seem doable, while also setting clear expectations on what I'm after. And these questions avoid yes and no answers that are not really helpful at all in the context of feedback or anywhere really. And they frame feedback as advice to increase empathy in their feedback while also nudging them to come up with actionable points. I use these questions or a variation of them when I ask someone for feedback, whether that be a document or feedback on myself. The key is thinking about the scope. What can I focus this person on in their feedback to ensure that they can make the time and come up with something that's meaningful and actionable, something that's useful to me. And even though I'm well known to ask a lot of questions, both as a former executive and coach, using them to learn more about myself didn't occur to me up until this point. I like to understand the hows, the whats, the whos, the whys, and the whens. I'm an engineer at heart still. So it seemed only natural to extend that approach to my own blind spots and those of my team. Leadership is full of delusions that we have about ourselves and our organizations. We've covered 2 of them here and seemingly resolved them, at least for the time being. But the work really is to be on the lookout for blind spots constantly and address them as you go. They'll never stop appearing, just like that box of chicken shit. What I do whenever that happens is I take a step back and try to turn my learnings into a framework that I can execute whenever a similar situation reappears. And if you want to hear about more of the delusions that I've experienced in my career or share yours, come up to me after the talk. Or if you need help with leadership challenges in your organization, give us a call. Or sign up to be notified when our book comes out next year and be the first to read. The book goes deeper on the topics I've talked about today and a ton more. I've also compiled more details on everything that I've talked about today in this document over here. And thank you.